All right, so you should have answered this question. Where were black people taken from? They were taken from Africa. Once they were taken from Africa, they were then taken to the United States. But where were they taken from? It was Africa. Africa is where they lived, and unfortunately, they were taken from their home. All right, so now that we're back in 400 years ago, white men have went and got black people from Africa, have brought them to America. Now they're becoming slaves. Now we're getting into the part of our American history where black people were slaves. So slavery in America. It really is a sad part of our history. But we have to learn about it so we can learn from it. All right, so the first thing I say on this side is whoa, because by 1690, so it's been about 80 years. Every single colony in the USA has slave owners, and each of those slave owners has slaves working for them. Now, when I say colony, that's just a fancy word for the state. So back in the day, it wasn't the United States of America, it was just the colonies. And you can see kind of the major ones right here. And in fact, Kentucky, the state that you live in, wasn't even really a colony. It was actually this little part right here of Virginia. So, fun fact. But most of the prominent, the most important states that you're going to hear about are the ones that have the names, because those are the ones that had the most slaves because they had the most crops and farmland that they needed help with the slaves. The only bad thing is, I mean, it's okay if you need help on your farm, but these poor slaves were treated so badly and they never did get paid. It was like they were their property. They treated them just like they treated their horses that worked on their land. So the cool thing is that things started to change. People started to notice that slavery was not a good thing, that these people weren't being paid for their work, that they were being beaten if they refused to do their work, and they worked up until the day they died, and they started working as soon as they were able to walk. But in 1808, so 213 years ago, so about 200 years of slavery has been going on. And then finally, 200 years go by, and this man, Thomas Jefferson, who was a president of the United States, finally starts to make a stop to it. So he says, we're not going to go and trade black people as slaves from Africa anymore. So he stops the trading. So ships are not allowed to travel to Africa anymore. You like my ship drawing? They're not allowed to travel to Africa anymore and pick up slaves. They're stopping all of that. But the black people that already live in the USA are still slaves and are owned by white people still, and still being traded to other white people and still not being treated very well, still not getting paid for their work. But we're taking a step in the right direction. Right, so now here's where history is starting to take notes. We're able to take photographs. So you start to hear about more famous people in this time of our country. And the first guy I want to talk about is Frederick Douglass because this guy is awesome. So from 1818 to 1895 is when he was alive. So about 200 years ago was when he was born, 1818. And so he was a very smart man, and there was a reason for that. So he learned how to read and write from the wife of his slave owner, even though it was against the law. Once the slave owner found out that his wife was teaching Frederick how to read and write, she got in some big trouble, and he said absolutely not. But he already knew enough to where he could start to teach himself how to read. He taught other slaves how to read. But the cool thing is, the reason why he started to read, he started to find newspapers, and he would read those newspapers, and he was learning that slavery was not right. They wanted to make sure slaves didn't know how to read so that they couldn't find this out. They wanted them to think it was just the way of life. That way they wouldn't want to change and make a better plan for themselves. They wanted them to keep working for them and not having to pay them. Duh. So he started reading newspapers and he started to learn that slavery was not right. So, since he knew that there really wasn't much he could do about it, because if he tried to escape or if he tried to, say he didn't want to work anymore, they would probably end up just whipping him or even killing him or trading him to a new farm that might have an even meaner slave owner. So, he decided he was going to escape. And he did that in 1838. So, when he was 20 years old, he hopped on a train and he left and never looked back. I think he made it all the way to New York, which didn't have slaves at the time. And when he got to New York, he made something for himself. He wrote a book. He was the author of a newspaper, and the newspaper and books talked about how slavery was so terrible and how we need to change our world and make slavery not a thing anymore because it was so bad. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is the Underground Railroad. Now, if you learned about Harriet Tubman last week and a little bit this week, you know what the Underground Railroad is. It's not an actual railroad. You won't see a train driving on it. It was just a name to confuse the white people that were trying to capture these slaves. So if you got a chance to go to the Underground Railroad, it's because you were trying to escape from your slave owner and become a free black person. So basically, the Underground Railroad was a secret route in the United States with houses along the way. These houses are belong to people that would give slaves a safe place to hide so they wouldn't get caught by their owner. So the people that lived in these homes did not believe in slavery. They wanted black people to have their freedom, so they would house them, hide them in the attics, hide them in the basements, hide them in the walls, hide them in secret rooms to keep the slave owners from finding them. So they would stay there during the day, and then when the sun went down, they would go again and travel to the next part of the Underground Railroad. And eventually they would make it up to the states that didn't have slaves where they would get their freedom. And the reason why I'm telling you about the Underground Railroad is because of this awesome lady right here, Harriet Tubman. And most of you all know something about her because you've been doing your Nearpods this week from Miss Just, and Miss Ramos taught us about Harriet Tubman last Friday too. So she lived about 200 years ago, but the cool thing is she almost lived to be 100 years old, guys. So you could even say that she lived 200 years ago and she lived 100 years ago. That's how old that she was. And she lived a very, very stressful, crazy, sad, but amazing life. So in 1849, she escaped from slavery using the Underground Railroad. She realized that it was something that she needed to do. I believe she said that God was the one that told her that she needed to help rescue more people. So she spent several years after her escape going back to where she was a slave, helping to free other slaves and traveling the Underground Railroad with them. She said that she liked to travel at night because the slave owners would be hard to see them whenever it was dark because there wasn't a lot of light around. And she liked to travel on Saturdays because Sunday usually farmers didn't work and they weren't around their slave, so they wouldn't notice that the slave was gone until that Monday. So that gave them 2 extra days. And she liked to travel during the winter because who wants to chase after something in the cold forest during the winter time? Not me. So she would often escape with people on Saturdays. It usually was cold in the winter because the slave owners would be too lazy to go run after them. And it was normally at night where you couldn't see anybody. All right, so now you're going to be doing a matching to talk about our friends Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and Thomas Jefferson.